Welcome back to the Not Your Mama podcast. This is your host, Kelly Bryant, and I am joined today by Moss Froom, who is a doula and a childbirth educator, right?
Yeah.
Welcome, Moss.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited you're here. I was saying before we started recording that we had to reschedule because you had a birth. And so I was like, I've been waiting for this podcast for so long. So let's start. If you could just tell us your pronouns and which emoji you most identify as.
Well, I use they and them pronouns, and the emoji that I feel like I use most frequently is it's the peach butt. It's got to be the peach butt.
I love the peach butt emoji. I'm like, I had a guest who is a running trainer, and I was like, don't take this the wrong way, but I most identify you with the peach butt emoji because everything she teaches is glute strength. But I like that you're not a trainer, and so this is probably not pertinent to like glute strength training.
Not necessarily, but
love it. Okay, so I don't like to do big, long, drawn-out intros. I would love for you to tell us kind of how you got into the birth space, anything else about you personally that you want to share, your status as far as kids, any of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, so I trained as a doula like a really long time ago, actually, and didn't get started immediately. But it was about 2 years ago, just by virtue of having, I think, like lived in the city that I live in, which is Baltimore, for about like 7 years at that point, about like arriving into my early 30s and, having these like deep roots in my trans community, like the people around me just started being on their fertility journeys and their family building journeys. And having had my background of getting trained as a doula, I was like, oh, exciting. I get to like help you find the resources that are going to be speaking to you and like find you the doulas that you need. And for lots of my friends, just like, was coming up so short. There was just like nothing or very little out there for my friends in my community as they were, getting into experiencing the perinatal health world and just being on their family building journeys. So I was like, oh, I guess it's time for me to actually start practicing as a doula and start creating these resources that I know that people need and everything else. So that happened just about 2 years ago. And so for the last 2 years, I've been providing like one-on-one doula services for like in a full spectrum way. So for people at all points on their family building and reproductive health journeys, and also training other birth workers and how to provide more gender affirming services to the people in their communities too. So
yeah, and I see occasionally on Instagram, you'll take other people's resources and make them more gender affirming, which I think is like a really it's indicative of like what the birth world is right now, and also a really valuable service that you're just like doing for free.
Yeah, like there's just so little out there, so it feels important to me to be like, even if it's kind of like in an underground way, just like getting information more accessible to the people that I love and that I care about.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say as we're kind of embarking on this conversation is I think, and so I assume, I could be incorrect, I assume that the vast majority of my listeners are white, cis women, because we tend to listen to people who look like and sound like and have life experiences like us. So I know that for a lot of my listeners, conversations around gender identity they feel very fraught because they want to be nice. They want to like not say the wrong thing, but they also don't get it. And so I want to say at the start of this, like, I'm putting myself out here to probably say some stupid shit.
Right.
And hopefully Moss is going to tell me and be like, yo, that was like not the coolest way to say that. And also to say like, this doesn't have to suck. Like, I think that's part of it too, is that, people are so afraid to do it. And so we work up in our head, like, can I ask someone their pronouns? And then it's like, it's like so unpleasant. And so that's thing one that I wanted to say, that like, for people who are listening to the podcast, you're smiling. you're nice, like you're not like at all scary. And also that you don't speak for all queer, trans, non-binary folks, that you're an educator, you work with people, like a large number of people, so you have diverse perspectives. But also if someone has a trans or queer person in their life, what you say, what you say doesn't negate what that individual says
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well.
That's so true. I mean, in all of my work, I think the main takeaway that I am trying to get out there is like, don't assume anything about somebody. And
Mm-hmm.
so that applies here too. It's like, really the whole gist of everything is like, you just don't assume anything about somebody's identity, about their
Mm-hmm.
family, about their like past experiences. And this stuff applies to everybody, trans or not. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it is like, especially when we're talking about birth world, which is just like as a baseline so rigidly gendered, it actually takes a lot to like move people past assuming things about people, and in parenthood culture too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, you're wearing a shirt that says, what, not all pregnant people are women? Yeah, that's what I was guessing the bottom half of it was. Yeah.
Not all
Not all
pregnant.
pregnant people are women. Can you, like, I almost hate to spend our time this way, but can you define for us gender, women, female, like how is it possible that not all pregnant people are women? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I can answer this for like in the broad space, but I can talk a little bit about like, so a lot of us who maybe were assigned female at birth, which like I was assigned female at birth. Just because we were assigned female at birth doesn't necessarily mean that we are women. And that can, everybody has a different sort of relationship to their body and a different relationship to gender. But there's lots of us out here who are like trying to have babies and having abortions and having miscarriages, and we're not women. So having interacting with especially perinatal health world and parenthood culture, just being like assumed to be women all the time, it sucks.
Yeah, and we're totally going out of order from the questions that I prepped you with, but
That's okay.
what does that mean for people? Like, what is the effect of that, of having, I've heard all kinds of stories of like, insisting that medical forms have to have a birth name on them.
Mhm.
Just different assumptions about people's pronouns and you know how they are going to birth. How is that problematic? What are kind of the effects of that for people who are becoming parents or on that journey?
Yeah, well, it's putting you in a constant state of being misgendered, which if like I know it's sometimes hard for people who have not had the experience of being misgendered to like understand what that means, and it's different for everybody. Like I'm saying, like nobody has the same experience of anything, literally anyone in the world. So being misgendered feels different for everybody, but I think if you're trans generally, like it can range from being like extremely like triggering and re-traumatizing to just baseline like super uncomfortable and just weird. I think for most of us, getting misgendered means that that the people who are around you and who are talking to you see you as something completely different than you truly are,
Hmm.
which I think for anyone is an uncomfortable experience. Like I think how I would describe or um try to relate this experience to somebody who hasn't experienced misgendering is like, if you can imagine like being in a doctor's office and your doctor is like calling you by the wrong name over and over and over again. If you can imagine that feeling, which like everyone hates having their name, like the wrong name referred to them. And so like if you can imagine what that feeling feels like, and then like amplified by like it's your doctor who is providing medical care for you, so you're already in a vulnerable position, and then amplify that by like 10 to be like, this is even more fundamental to my being than my name necessarily is.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, if you can kind of imagine exploding that weird squicky feeling out into like a super exponentially stronger sensation,
Yeah.
then that's like a little bit of an idea of what being misgendered feels like. And so if you are somebody who has like grown up with tons of trauma associated by being misgendered, like lots of people experience so much horrible shit throughout their lives, especially if like, you know, being trans and being misgendered forever and having like, you know, like abuses and traumas placed upon you because of that. When you're super vulnerable in perinatal health, and that's like being poked at over and over and over again, because truly being misgendered is just like the air that you're breathing when you are interacting with perinatal health world and parenthood culture as a trans person. So if you can imagine just like how much anxiety and depression and, you know, all kinds of other like mental health stuff gets brought up by all of that, like it's a super intense experience. And it's like not, you know, it's everything when you're going
Yeah.
through
I'm
reproduction.
thinking of the stories that I get from the cis parents in my different classes and programs where they're like, you know, they'll say something like, you know, someone was like, you know, asked to touch my belly at the grocery store. And they're just like, I'm just really sensitive right now because I'm pregnant. I'm like, you take that and apply it to like, and I also want to note for people who are cis, like I've asked myself this question, what would it feel like to be misgendered? And it's like, my experience is not relevant, because if someone called me a man, I would just be like, that's very strange. Like they don't understand. It's not something that I have like been, you know, had like years of trauma around, and also like gone through all of the work of like transitioning to then have that all be like negated. So it's not something that I think, you know, we're often trying to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. It is not someone's shoes that you can get in. You know, you can look at it and try to understand, but I think the best way to understand is to listen as opposed to put yourself in that position. And I mean, the backstory, you probably don't know this, the backstory of the name of this podcast, the Not Your Mama podcast, is that when I was pregnant and newly postpartum, I swear a word coming up, I fucking hated being called mama or mom by people who were not my child. I'm like, that's not my fucking name. Like, if you are my medical provider, I would like for you to actually use my name. And so to have, and that is, again, me not having any like trauma around this, not any backstory, just being like kind of like just being a little bit of a snarky bitch, that I'm like, I deserve to be called by my name. The fact that I'm having a child does not negate who I am. And then to like put that on top of your gender identity and all of that is just, I imagine, very challenging. So how, we're talking a lot about medical providers,
right?
How do other people who are not medical providers, who are potentially not even in a role like you or me, where we're working directly with parents in a professional capacity, how do other humans just have any ability to like change the spaces in their community?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I think that there's so much that people can do, like coming from the position of power of being the person that's being sort of like already included or marketed to in these spaces. And so I think, like, first of all, just like on an individual level, I think that one thing that everybody can do is learn how to like apologize and move on when you do misgender somebody, because that's like your first sort of like ticket into being able to like have respectful and meaningful interactions and communications with folks who are trans. Because ultimately, like, we all know we all make mistakes, and this is like part of the game, but knowing how to like rebuild that trust and how to be respectful in those moments is super important. And so like, it's a really, I think, quick and easy process, which is to first correct yourself, then quickly like and concisely apologize, and then move on. I think that a lot of people get really stuck in the like, I fucked up, like, and kind of like make that the central organizing principle of the apology, which makes just you and me and everybody involved super uncomfortable. So if you can just like be the person that recognizes that you made a mistake and correct it, like re-say the thing that you said, but with the correct language, apologize quickly and swiftly, and then just keep it rolling, keep the conversation moving. That's like, just like as a baseline, like one of the most important things that you can do as like a community member.
And I think that this very much echoes what was, I mean, obviously the George Floyd kind of awakening of last May was not the beginning of the race conversation, but there was a lot more awareness, I think, around conversations of like white shame and white guilt. And I think that there's a very similar equivalent here of like, if you are the person who is in the, you know, included group or in the, I don't want to say position of power because you don't have power over trans people, but in the more centered group, centering yourself and being like, I'm so sorry, blah, and like making someone else not have to, but
yeah, you were putting that person in the position of having to forgive you in order to keep the conversation moving.
Right. And ultimately, no one has to forgive you.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, this is like my life's work right now, is like just being okay with letting people have feelings. And I think that that's like a big deal for all people, but the more differences you come to the table with, the more you have to be okay with saying like, you have your space and your opinions and your beliefs and your emotions, and I have no control over that. And you don't owe me the opportunity to be forgiven, right? That it's just like, if you want to hate me forever because I misgender you, that's your right. Like, and hopefully it comes from a place of genuine mistake and people can move forward, but you don't get to
kind of got to prove that, because there are so many people out there who are like doing it on purpose to make you feel disrespected. So it's like, it's all about the follow-up.
Yeah, exactly. So one big thing, I mean, I will say, I don't in any way want to like say that I'm amazing at this, because I'm not, but I last year wrote an entire book about prenatal exercise, and then I got to editing it and I was like, I'm going to take she, women, like out of it everywhere. And it's pervasive. I'm like, how do I edit what I've quoted out of a study? Because like, but it really is everywhere. And yet it's not that hard. Like literally to like hit like Command F women and just replace it with birthing people, pregnant people, folks, like whatever. And the same thing around all of my like website copy and offerings and things like that, that it's like, do I really think, and someone asked me this, do I really think a whole bunch of trans people are suddenly going to want to work with me? No, probably not, because I don't share their life experiences.
Right.
But if someone lands on my website and I can make them not feel shitty, like why not make them not feel shitty? And I think that maybe is more applicable to people who are in this boat of like, well, this doesn't really apply to me. I don't really know any trans people. I don't know any queer families. Like, so what? Like, it's not that hard to practice.
Yeah, totally. And like, you know, you never know who you already know who is trans, and you just don't know it yet. And like, maybe they won't feel comfortable revealing that to you unless you do this work to make it clear that you like will respect and like love them regardless. So
yeah,
that like a lot of people know more trans people than they think that they do, because people just don't feel comfortable sharing that information with them.
Yeah, I went down a wild rabbit hole the other day. I choose not to get involved in Facebook comments, but I went down a rabbit hole to edify myself on like what the numbers were as far as people who are born not even in the category of female or male, which is a thing.
More,
and that's a very large number.
Yeah, no, more people are intersex than are red-haired.
Which is wild. So intersex is, thank you for saying the word because I could not remember it. Intersex is the term for like not necessarily having genitalia or hormonal whatever that matches your chromosomes. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, I mean, there's like lots and lots of ways that all of those different biological factors can be mixed and matched in ways that don't like fit into our like binary sex assignment system. So there's lots of different ways that people can be intersex, but generally it's like, yeah, some sort of like a non-binary sort of like mix of things like chromosomes and genitalia and hormonal balances.
Yeah. So I mean, that alone is like just from that number, like, and the person might not even know, like, right, that if you were born intersex, someone makes a determination, and like you might not even know that.
Yeah, it's really scary how like just non-consensual genital surgeries are happening on babies all the time. It's like there's amazing work being done by intersex activists to push back against this as like the norm in medical care.
Mhm.
So that's amazing work that they're doing. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's wild.
I think for me, I find that understanding intersex humans is like a good gateway into understanding a lot of gender identity, because it's infants. And it's like, people get very wrapped up in like, you're choosing this, which we're not
Yeah.
going to entertain today, but like, it's very easy to just say like, this is an infant who does not present as male or female. So from birth, we don't have two clear genders where someone's identity lines up with their genitals. So that was just a totally random aside. I did that.
It's real because people like to really be like, but the science says there's two genders, and it's just absolutely not true that that is the case.
The
But
science says what the researchers believe is what the science says.
yeah, who are, like the institution of science itself was built upon like all kinds of horrifying like eugenics, racism, and like, sexism stuff. So it's like, well, it makes sense that the science that we are popularly taught now still brings with it all of that horrible racism and sexism and eugenics attitudes.
It's wild. If anyone wants to have a separate conversation about this, like, drop me a DM, because I've seen some shit, and some things I'm just like, this isn't in the scope of what I teach, and I'm not gonna like try to teach this, but it is something that I'm very interested in having conversations about. Totally random. Okay, so I got a question from a follower that was basically a variation on like, I know that I can ask people's pronouns.
Yeah.
Within the context of birth. So like, let's say that you run into this person at your OB's office or something, like, that they are pregnant or that they are building a family. What, if any, follow-up questions are appropriate, right? So, this comes up with lesbian couples. Is it okay to ask who's going to carry, or how are you getting pregnant? Like,
Yeah.
I think generally the answer is probably it's not okay in general, and it depends how well you know this person. But what, if anything, is appropriate to ask people about how they're building a family?
I think that it comes down to like ask yourself, like, would I ask a cis person this question? Because it's like we're all just people doing the same thing of trying to go to the doctor and trying to gestate a baby. So it's like, if you are like, I think that's a good way to measure up like how well do I know this person and when is a question appropriate. It's like, if you were just seeing like a cis acquaintance at the doctor's office, would you ask them like,
are you doing IVF?
or like, whose sperm got you pregnant? Like, I think like you just got to really like situate yourself and like, is this an appropriate question generally before thinking through, is it an appropriate question to ask a trans person, et cetera, or a queer person?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good bar. And what I said to this follower is, I find, because I dabble in fertility communities and people who are pre-conception, I don't find a lot of those questions appropriate to ask anyone.
Right. I think it's like asking, I talk about this in my birth worker trainings. It's like, don't ask unnecessary questions. It's like, do you need to know the answer to this question to like, in that context, like to work with this person as their doula or whatever? But also like, do you need to know the answer to this question to like be this person's like random acquaintance at the doctor's office? Like,
right.
Probably not. And if it's somebody who you're closer to, then like obviously the questions change because you just like care for this person. But I think it's about identifying like, am I asking this question because it will help me support this person, or am I asking this question because I'm curious? Because ultimately, like, don't ask people things just because you're curious about whatever it is. And especially like if it's like, stuff that is like sensitive, like asking people about their like genitalia and asking people about their like reproductive processes is like, likely not something that you would do unless you like knew somebody super, super well and were like, I want to know these things so that I can be a good, be a good friend to you and a supporter of you.
Yeah, I use the litmus test of like, am I asking a variation on what someone does in the bedroom?
Right.
And if it's like, if it's ultimately some variation on like what goes in where and like how and whose, then it's like not my business.
Yeah, you don't need to know. And yeah, totally.
And I think there's also like the part that I think is challenging for people is identifying for themselves. Like, am I just curious? Because
Yeah.
as human, like, I also want to validate that, like, as humans, we like to understand what our mutual experiences are. We want to relate. And so it can feel challenging if you're pregnant and you're thinking, like, you know, I know that this person is building a family. Like, what conversations can we have? How can I relate what I'm experiencing to what they're experiencing? And that can feel tricky. And so I don't know if you have any offhand, like any open-ended questions that are like safe and welcoming. Anything come to mind?
I mean, I think it's just anything that you would ask somebody who you didn't think was trans, like, how are you feeling? Like, are you sick all the time? I'm sick all the time. Like, how, like, like just all the usual stuff.
Yeah.
There's not a lot that's like completely different just because you don't identify as a woman necessarily. So it's like, I think it's just thinking about how would you talk to any fellow pregnant person. It doesn't have to be like particular questions just because somebody doesn't necessarily identify as a woman or a mother or whatever.
Right. I think there's also like, I mean, how are you feeling is a great one. It's like not a leading question. It's just like, I am making no assumptions. And they can be like, I'm having a crappy day. And if that's what they want to share with you, as opposed to like, oh man, I got some lightning crotch. Like, that's totally valid. That, everyone has different bars for what they're willing to share about their genitals. Like,
Sure. Absolutely.
I will share everything. I'll be like, so lightning crotch is, but
strong.
Not everyone has that same bar.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
So this is something that I know I have had this thought. And so I like want to recognize that probably people listening are currently having the same thought, if not, had in the past, which is like, yeah, but like I live in Stewart, Florida. Like Martin County doesn't have like, I know like 5 gay people and they're all just boring gay. They're just like, they just like the other gender. It's, or, the same gender. It's like not, I'm like, we don't have trans people. We don't have non-binary people. This doesn't apply to me. So can you, like, you did say you might know trans people without knowing trans people, but I mean, any other kind of, does that bring anything up for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Stewart, so I was a trans person at Stewart at some point in my life, and like I was not able to like be out when I was there, like for lots of reasons. I think but I think one thing that is different about when I lived in Stewart when I was growing up and now is just how much more like readily available information is about like the possibilities that are out there for people who are queer and trans. So like when I was growing up in Stewart, like no one ever told me that I could be non-binary. Like that was like not on my radar as like a thing that was possible. But like at this point in the world, like there are people in Stewart who know that that's available to them. And so
wow.
So there's like just infinitely more possibility that there are folks coming out and are coming out to themselves and not quite ready to like talk about it yet, or just in a process. And I think that like what you were saying, that it can be so much more about like, why would I like do things in a way that would make somebody potentially feel shitty when like the entire rest of the perinatal and parenthood world is like already doing that. It's like, if I can be like the one person who's like prepared to talk to somebody who is trans and to be a friend to them, it's like, why not just be that person? I think that if you are, I think if you are prepared, then you'll find that there are more trans people around than you thought there might be. But
Yeah. And I mean, like for me, a big shout out to the only reason that I even considered like striking women from my prenatal exercise book is because I did a prenatal yoga teacher training where they encouraged us to not use gendered pronouns. And it was like the first time that had even crossed my mind. And
yeah,
it was interesting because it was like a 2 weekend training a month apart. And so that first weekend, I had like a lot of like, I'll do it if someone who's actually trans shows up. I don't need to do this, blah, 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 blah. And then by the second weekend, it was like, who cares? Like, it's not that hard.
yeah,
And, you know, some of the suggestions they made were like, use they, them pronouns with your pet. They will not know, like, they will not know or care. Like,
yeah, that's a way to practice.
use they, them pronouns with other people's babies who are unborn, who, you know, you don't need to ask, what are you having? It's like,
What kind of genitals does that baby have?
have you seen them on the screen or have you just had the XY chromosome test? It could make a difference. So, I mean, I don't know if there's other, any other suggestions you have for the like straight cis folks who are like, I don't want to do this. It's scary.
Yeah, I think another element of it is another thing that you touched on is just like I think that operating in a less gender specific way is honestly great for everybody because like you were saying about being called mama all the time, like there's plenty of people out there who are like stop doing that. Like it's not that I don't identify as a mom, but I just like hate it when fellow adults call me mommy. It's weird. And so
Yeah.
it's like that kind of thing can hit on all different levels. Like it doesn't like I think that like even as people who do like identify as women and mothers, it's like being constantly referred to as like women and mothers just every single sentence. It's like you are also a person. So it's like
Mhm.
it doesn't take anything away to like give you a little bit more room to like breathe and come up with your own identity and your own sort of like way that you want to function as a parent and way that you want to identify yourself in a world where you get like more options. And I think that
Mhm.
that's yeah, I think that's good for everybody, trans or not.
And the other thing that's, I mean, I don't think it's quite this, like you were saying, people might not tell you they're trans until they know that you are like a safe person to say that
Yeah.
to. But I also think that it's opening myself up to the potential that like not everyone I know in the birth space is going to be straight cis
Yeah.
women, that like suddenly I know more trans people, not because people are coming out to me, but because it's like, I don't know if it's like the algorithm, but like the universe is presenting to me that there are other ways to be pregnant. And I mean, the reason that I finally got around to asking you to be on the podcast is that our mutual friend had sent me your Instagram like years ago. And I'd
Yeah.
been like, that's cool. They're a doula in another place. This is not relevant to me. And then you started showing up on like the stories of everyone I knew. And I was like, I know them. Like,
That's so sweet.
so it really is like, I think the more, whether it's the universe or the algorithm or whatever, like the more you open yourself up to the possibility that there are other people who aren't parenting just like you, the more it suddenly comes to be true.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so briefly, let's talk a little bit about, so we've been talking a lot about perinatal, like specifically, you know, while people are gestating or birthing. Let's talk a little bit about once people have kids.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where we get into like mommy and me groups, mom groups, like all of play dates, like how, I know that you're a full spectrum doula, so you do work with folks like through
Postpartum.
postpartum, but I mean, also like, can you explain chest feeding, all of the things postpartum? What do you want to tell us, Moss?
Yeah, I mean, I think that postpartum world is sort of its own landscape of constant misgendering generally. And there's a lot of people talking about like nursing and body feeding and chest feeding right now. And I think that something that I see in like the media coverage of this conversation is like it's really doing a disservice to the conversation generally, because it's framing a lot of the like articles and stuff that are kind of like sensationalizing this conversation are sort of framing it as like the trans people are trying to tell you you can't say breastfeeding anymore, which is just absolutely not the case. The thing that those of us in birth world who are trying to come up with language that suits trans people and that maybe just gives more options for people to use are like, the idea is to like start from a place of not assuming things about people. So using words that like body feeding or even like nursing, like things that are already in common use but don't necessarily have such gendered baggage, as a jumping off point. And then ultimately, like the point is to use whatever words feel good to that individual person. So it's like no one's saying that like you can't call what you do breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
Like if that resonates with you, hell yeah, that's great. But it's like if you're talking to a group of people, not assuming that everybody in that group uses the same terminology. So jumping off from a point that feels a little bit more gender open or just a little bit less assumptive, I think is like the key. So using words like chest feeding or body feeding are great because everybody has a chest and everybody has a body. So it's like not necessarily so it just doesn't assume things about people. And so no one's trying to say you can't say breastfeeding. It's just like if you use a less gendery term as a jumping off point, then it's great for everybody. But ultimately, everybody gets to use whatever words they want, and that's the whole point.
Yeah, I really like nursing. I have no idea why, but like it kind of fell out of my vocabulary because breastfeeding felt more like technically correct.
Mhm.
But the reality is that nursing also includes people who bottle feed, which can be completely, that is part of gender identity of like being like, not all people who have children ultimately chest feed because they may not lactate.
Mhm.
And also the like, some people who are cis don't feed at the breast. Also, some kids are raised by their grandparents, and also some kids are adopted. And like,
Yeah.
what's fascinating about the human body is like many people can lactate, which you had a post about this and I was like, oh my God.
Yes.
But also anybody can choose not to,
Exactly.
which is the cool thing about lactation. Can
Yeah.
you tell us briefly, like, who can lactate?
Well, pretty much anybody can lactate through like induced lactation. And so induced lactation, if you're not familiar, is like a protocol of either like taking hormones or pumping or using herbs, any kind of combination of these things to just sort of like spontaneously create lactation in the body. And I think that if a lot of like one of the big misinformation pieces, there's tons of misinformation out there about like trans reproductive health, but one of them is that like only people who are assigned female at birth can lactate, which is just not true. People who are assigned male at birth can also induce lactation, and so like moms who are trans can induce lactation. I think in a lot of couples where maybe like the birthing person has had top surgery and is like not sure that they're going to be able to produce like a full like a comprehensive sort of like full baby feeding supply, like a partner who maybe has not had chest surgery might or a partner who is like a trans mom might induce lactation to like collaboratively feed this baby.
That sounds delightful.
Right.
Having been the only breastfeeder in my relationship, I'm like, shit.
Yeah, if you could offload some of that onto somebody else, it'd be great. And anyone can do it. Like, I mean, it's like including cis men can induce lactation. Inducing lactation is not like an easy feat. So it's like
Mhm.
a real commitment. That's basically like you're sort of like taking hormones that sort of like make your body function as if it is pregnant. And then you cut them off like maybe a couple weeks before the baby is
Mm.
born and then start trying to produce because it's like just mimics in your body the hormonal cycles that happen throughout gestation and birth.
Mhm.
um so it's like a huge commitment. It kind of it hormonally like feels like multiple pregnant people in a family, which is kind of a lot.
Yeah.
But for folks who really like want that experience and who want to contribute to the family in that way, I think it's really special and amazing that anyone can do it.
Yeah. And shoot, there was something that you said that I was going to riff on. My husband, by the way, edits these. So if we ever have another kid,
Hell yeah.
No, I don't. He very much needs to be my nurse. So
Yeah.
he cannot also be a wet nurse. Like there is a need for one non-hormonal person.
Totally.
Oh, shoot, it was right there. No, I don't know. I did just meet my very first person who induced lactation, who was an adoptive parent, which was, I was just like, oh my God. And then she told me that the person who helped her do it was my lactation consultant. And I was like, oh my God. I already had so much mad respect for this person. And now I'm like, wow.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So we talked a little bit about the nursing side of things. What about in general, in like, I mean, I feel like I'm asking you for like how to be a decent person. Like any other like guidance or like, the simple one is like ask people their pronouns before assuming. Is there anything else that people can do, like if they are in a parent group, even if they assume everyone there is a cis woman?
Yeah. I mean, I think like asking everybody's pronouns is great because it just gets you into the habit of doing it, and it leaves space for people to tell you if they've changed or if they finally feel comfortable revealing it to you. But also I think like as parents in groups who are like the expected people to be there, I think you do have a lot of power and sway to be the people who are advocating for changes in how the group functions to make them more welcoming to folks who are trans who may come along in the future. So I think like talking to whoever are like the people who are organizing or leading your groups and being like, what can we be doing or like, yeah, making suggestions for what we can be doing to make the spaces more accessible to trans people. I mean, I think like I think things like the names of things is like a fraught conversation because a lot of things are like mommy groups and whatever, which, once again, like if you are not an adult woman who likes to be called mommy by fellow adults, like this can also be a benefit to you to like be advocating for changes to these things.
Yeah, if something is called mommy and me, I'm like, oh, this isn't for me. These are not my folks. Like
totally. So I think like, yeah, if it's like groups that you feel invested in, talking to the organizers about like if there's possibility and wiggle room to like change the names of things to become more accessible, talking to the other parents in the groups because you don't want to necessarily be like inviting trans folks into spaces where people are going to be actively hostile towards them. So, making sure that the other people in your group are like baseline understanding and respectful of folks who may come in the future who are trans. And I think like just getting used to getting used to as a group, like between you and your friends and your parent friends, like used to the idea that like parents can have all different genders and yeah.
If it feels safer for people, I think I've been surprised by the number of my friends who I consider to be like very affirming.
Yeah.
How much they don't realize this stuff, not in a like mean-spirited way of just like it's never even occurred to them, which is, I mean, very much like this podcast can, in case anyone is listening who is like one of my current or potential clients, we aren't mean to trans people here. So like, if that's not cool, this is not your space. So like, I think I have been surprised by like how many people who I think are like, whatever word you want to use, liberal or open or whatever, that just like, it hasn't occurred to them.
Yeah.
To even consider that other gender identities exist in the parenting space.
Yeah.
Let me double check my questions, see if I have anything else for you. Okay. I think what I want to ask you is if there's, I mean, I'm going to have you also plug all your stuff because I think you're also doing like digital doula services, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But can you also tell us if I know that you're like, you have stuff constantly on Instagram of like, support this person. Like you're very involved in your community and in the broader community outside of just Baltimore. If you could ask the listeners for like one piece of homework to go do something specific, if it's something to sign, something to donate to, like, is there, or if it's just to go follow you and donate to everything you post, but is there some way that people can like take a step that is not purely performative to actually further openness, equality, affirmation, whatever you want to call it, for trans and queer folks?
That's a great question. Well, the first thing that comes to mind, I think, is there's a lot of other trans birth workers who are doing this work with me. And the person who comes to mind right now is King Ya, who is a Black trans birth worker who's running right now, like beginning in the next few weeks, a 9-week course called Birthing Beyond the Binary. And so I think like that's a great place to dive deeper if you want to, like, as a perinatal health professional or just like person who wants to be a good friend to folks in your community who are trans and maybe birthing or doing having any sort of experience on the family building journey. I think that taking that course from King Ya is like a great place to dig deep. And also just like if you are not necessarily trying to take a course, I think that donating money to their fund so that they can provide scholarships to other birth workers is a great way to plug in.
I love that. I think that, we mentioned earlier the kind of race awakening of 2020, and like a lot of that was around support Black business owners. And most trans folks who work as birth workers don't work with cis families because they're out there busy supporting trans families. Is that universally true? Or do you think that people can find trans birth workers who they can support even if they are cis? And I love that idea of donating so that they can provide scholarships if what they do is not necessarily for you.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, speaking for myself, like I work with everybody. I consider my services to be trans-centered, which really just translates to like not assuming things about people, which I do think is beneficial to everybody. So I work with plenty of people who are not trans. And so
I didn't know that. Fun.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, like I work with lots of clients who are cis in my community. And I'm here for it. So like I provide a childbirth ed course, which is it's called All Genders Birth Class. And it's just childbirth education, but it doesn't like use a ton of gendery language to talk about it. So once again, like that's absolutely, it's like literally for all genders. It's not just for trans people, but it does like center a non-gendered idea.
I'm tempted to take it just to like watch the like how it, to see it modeled, like, oh, I didn't think of using that word. Like,
Yeah, totally.
I think that's super interesting because it is super hard. I can tell you, I am not a childbirth educator, but I do a fair amount of childbirth education in my yoga classes.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you talk about all of this pelvic anatomy without assuming things? Like,
yeah, totally.
Okay, cool. Can you also tell us about what you offer? Apparently, you work with cis families. I didn't even know. So, what you offer, what digital doula services, what does that mean, and all of the different courses and things.
Yeah, so I'm a full spectrum doula. So I do doula services for folks at any point on their reproductive or perinatal health journeys. And things that I really like to do are like fertility doula and gestation and birth doula stuff. But I'm also here for anything else. So like postpartum, miscarriage and loss and abortion, any of it I'm here for. And so I do a lot of these things digitally as well as in person. Honestly, even with my in-person clients, so much of it right now is being on Zoom together once a month. So it's it's real regular for me to be doing remote services, as I think is true of a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I also do a bunch of education stuff. So like I said, I do a childbirth education course called All Genders Birth Class, but then I also do a lot of education with other birth workers and community members, like anybody who wants to be more solidly there for the trans people in their community. And so I have my upcoming gender affirming birth work workshops. I do like a 101 and a 201, and those are happening on the 18th and 19th of this month.
Month is March.
Yeah, it's now March.
I'm not sure. I think this is going out soon.
Okay, cool. Well,
but I'm not 100% sure. I have very, very gladly handed over podcast editing to my husband. So I have no idea when this is coming out. I'm just the face.
Wonderful. But I do those workshops like once every other month or so. So even
amazing. So people can go, and where can they find you?
So I'm at mossthedoula.com. And I'm also on Instagram at mossthedoula, where I'm always like posting regular updates about what I'm getting up to.
And you are a great person to follow for anyone who is like interested in having their eyes open. Like if you're queer curious, if you're like, what is birth outside of the like typical gender identities, you just post lots of information that's like, whoa, cool, bodies are awesome. So, and like I said at the beginning, you smile, you're nice. It's not scary at all to like consider having conversations around gender and how to create more open spaces. That said, you are not here for all the free labor. So like people should read your stuff and like take your courses and pay you for your knowledge, and not just like send you a bunch of DMs of like, I know someone who's trans. What should I say?
That's real. But honestly, I do one-on-one coaching with folks. It's like definitely tailored towards birth workers, but I'm here to get paid to answer questions. So if you are looking for somebody who is like going to meet you where you're at and like field the weird questions or what you feel like might be dumb questions or whatever, I'm here for that. So I do a whole like gender affirming birth work coaching thing. So
that's great. I love that. I think that, I mean, I wish that like every friend or family member of someone transitioning like would get a coach.
Yeah, I can be that.
or of course you can just start calling your cat they them and see how it goes.
I think that's good advice, because I think the biggest thing that you can do, and I should have said this earlier, but I think one of the most important things you can do is just practice, because you don't want the first time that like new words or whatever are leaving your mouth to be like in front of the person who is maybe going to be affected by them.
Totally.
And so practicing at home, practicing in the mirror, I know it feels silly, but honestly just being like, talking to yourself about whatever you've done throughout your day, but using gender neutral terminology and pronouns can be a powerful way to get you feeling like confident about doing it.
Totally. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to leave us with?
I guess I just have one more plug, which is that I'm going to be doing another round of my my talk with my amazing collaborator Joyelle, called Solidarity in Birthing, addressing anti-Blackness and transphobia in birth work. We're going to be doing that again on April 7th, so stay tuned to announcements about that.
I'm gonna have to look into that, because that is like a topic that I very much have wanted to cover, of just like race and birth is a big ol' thing too.
Yeah, and they're definitely like intimately intertwined in a way that I think a lot of people don't realize. So the history pieces of that I think are really interesting is the wrong word, because it's like horrifying, but are important to know.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so thank you so much for doing this. This has been such a pleasure. And I am so excited for all of my listeners to go check you out and to create a more open and understanding world.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.